Yeah, I'd like to just make a quick point here, and this point is something that came to me, um, after our discussion, and really something that I think our listeners should really think about and understand when it comes to this race. Because initially, when I watched the race, I didn't actually realize the extent to which the safety car period helped Lando Norris, and the extent to which the FIA made a huge mistake in handling the safety car period. So let me explain. So when the safety car came out at that point in the race, when Norris was leading, he missed that pit lane. So normally that would ruin your race. You've missed the pit lane, the safety cars come out, and the 12 seconds after the computer showed that the safety car was coming out, Norris had crossed the start finish line. And then 5 seconds later, he was at the end of the pit lane. This is usually where the safety car picks up the lead driver. Now, this is where things get really strange, because Bernd Mailander, who's the famous safety car driver in Formula One, he's been that for years, he didn't pick up Norris. He didn't pick up Norris at all. He should have waited and made sure he picked up Norris. Who did he pick up? He picked up Max Verstappen. So think about this. Why is this important? It's because Norris got to continue at fairly high speed down the circuit, while Mailander had backed up the rest of the pack, with Verstappen and the rest having to go at safety car speeds, while Norris could continue around the track at much higher speeds and have another chance to make a pit stop and come out in front of Verstappen. This was the key point in the race, because otherwise, Norris probably wouldn't have been able to come out in front of Verstappen. And he would have been down the pack, and he would have had to make overtakes despite his tremendous pace in order to win this race. And we all know catching is one thing in Formula One, overtaking is another entirely. So this was actually, now reflecting after our discussion and after the race, is something I didn't pick up initially. This was sheer incompetence by the FIA, and I'm going to go one step further. This merits an investigation. This is so suspicious. Nobody on Sky dared mention it because a British driver won, and it's not correct. We are not watching a sport for rigged events. We want pure competition. And Norris, despite the fact he was super quick and the McLaren was super quick, he was given a very unfair advantage due to a mistake by the FIA. And that doesn't sit right with me, because the way that was carried out almost seemed rigged. I'm not going to say it was, but when have you ever seen Bernd Mailander and the FIA pick up the wrong driver during a basic safety car procedure? Very strange, but more importantly, it gave Norris a very big advantage that he used to come out in front of Verstappen and ultimately pull away after the safety car came in and win the race.
This is the DRS train.
Welcome to the DRS Train podcast. This service is the 2024 Miami Grand Prix. I'm your driver, Peter Brook, and for the first time in a very long time, the old band is back together, because I'm joined by Nav F1 and Ciaron Smith. How are we doing, guys?
Hi, Peter. Looking forward to covering your race with the trio. It's been a few months now, I think.
Yeah, I think Nav said it all. It's been a while. It's good to be back with the band, and I'm sure we're gonna have a lot to talk about on this episode.
Yeah, this was an interesting race because, it's Miami, and for me, it's often been the most kind of let's just get this over with weekend of the year. But dare I say, it kind of slapped. I mean, new winner at long last. The sprint race had a lot more going on than you'd think. The tyres were being funny. I mean, overall, it was a fairly interesting weekend.
Yeah, I'm going to start being contrarian from the onset here. I heard a lot of people say that it was a banger, that it slapped. I even saw some people say that it was the best race in 2 years, which is, short-term memory is a big plague for Formula One fans. It was a good race, don't get me wrong, it was very fun, but to call it an absolute banger, one of the best races of the 2020s, I think there's some nuance here. It's like some people can't call something good anymore. it's either a shit race or an extremely good one. There is a nuance. There's a good race, and Miami was a good race, in my opinion, at least.
It kind of makes me think, Mum, can we have Valencia 2012? We have Valencia 2012 at home, that sort of thing. I can't think off the top of my head what would have been the best race in the past 2 years, but it wasn't this one, but it was one of the better ones. One of the better ones this year as well.
Yeah, I think that it was basically a result that nobody expected, despite the pace of the McLarens, and that's probably contributing to people overrating the actual quality of the race. I mean, we can get into that later, but really it was a safety car that triggered really the final positions, and frankly speaking, up to that point, there wasn't a whole lot going on track. I mean, if you look at the main protagonists, they didn't really make a ton of overtakes on track, wheel to wheel with other drivers. So it was a good race. It was unpredictable, but to quote Nav, like, absolute banger, not a chance.
Yeah, I mean, from the top 6, both the sprint and the main race were fairly gentlemanly performances for the most part, especially the sprint. I mean, that one stood out. I mean, a driver that stood out across both races really was Kevin Magnussen. I mean, in the sprint, he was basically being used as a bit of a battering ram by Haas, and kind of continued that in the race, and now he's on 10 points in his super license, so he's not far off a race ban. If nothing else, he provided some entertainment. I mean, good battles with Lewis, and then he ended up triggering that safety car that turned the race on its head. So that's
Well, I guess the first talking point that we're going to look at is Haas then. Kevin Magnussen. Some people are defending his acts because he's providing entertainment. I'm just glad that casual fans or maybe newer fans are seeing him for what he is, because Ocon got this tag of the guy who gets penalties and the guy who creates chaos, when a lot of us, not even older fans, just people who watched in the 2010s, knows that this tag should go to Magnussen. Magnussen in close racing is an absolute mess, and some of his moves are just plain nasty. So this year we're really seeing that, and I'm just glad that people are finally calling Magnussen for what he can do. And obviously, yes, he's playing the game, and he's proving that in F1 there's an issue. If you have a lot of penalties, you don't get reprimanded much worse if you keep getting more penalties. So during that sprint race, he was already on, 2 or 3 penalties, and then he just kept going against Lewis because he's not going to get more forward. And he's just proving some of the shortcomings of the system. And F1 has to address that, because it's all fun if it's for P12 or P10, but if Magnussen finds himself in P6 or 7 in a sprint race, and he does that to Norris or Perez or whatever, it's going to be bad.
Yeah, I think the thing is here, to your point, is that Kevin goes over the line with his defense, but he's also under a lot of pressure. I think he's being vastly outperformed by his teammate. And as a result, I think we're seeing some desperation creeping through. And we kind of saw that, I mean, all weekend, not just in the sprint, but also in the main race. He just made errors. And then his character, his demeanor after the race was just dejected. This is somebody who is really on the brink of being kicked out of F1, and he's driving like it. It's just desperation in my view, but maybe other people don't think that, but it's what it looked like to me.
Doesn't he have a contract extension? Even signed?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
The situation is that I thought he was gone for sure, because I didn't really consider Hulk to Audi for some reason, even though it's obvious. But now that Hulk is going to Audi, Haas would take a big step if they were to take on 2 new drivers next year. So just for the sake of giving a benchmark to Behrman, there's a very, very likely chance that they're going to keep Magnussen. I hope that they take on Bottas and Magnussen is also out, because I'm sorry, we cannot have Magnussen having 10 seasons in Formula One. It doesn't seem like it, but 10 seasons is a lot for Kevin Magnussen.
It is. I'm not quite sure how he's lasted this long.
There was a war. Literally a war happened, and that's how he lasted that long. Without the war, he doesn't come back. So,
so it's concerning because I do think that there have been other drivers in history that have had less than 10 years and have been better than Kevin Magnussen. If you think about it, Jean Alesi only had a few years over 10, and Kevin Magnussen's highlight was the very first race he ever did. I really still think that's the best race he ever did, and ever since then he's just kind of not lived up to the hype. And he seems to have a very poor level of composure. He just seems to be like overly aggressive and gets super defensive, and it just leads to him losing points or making mistakes. Enough's enough.
I think because I've done my deep dive series on Haas, I guess I learned a fair bit about his career. But yeah, first season was so against Button. I mean, the podium was the highlight, and that probably meant his stock soared. Didn't race 2015. 2016 Renault, all he did was crash hard enough to take the head cover. In his stint alongside Grosjean, it was kind of I kind of compare it to Leclerc and Sainz in that Grosjean was far more destructive, but his peaks were higher and his troughs were lower. So when he did well, he did really well, but then when he was bad, he was absolutely terrible. Whereas Magnussen had, he had some really solid races, and there would be the odd race where he just had no pace all weekend and no answer for Grosjean, and could be kind of argy-bargy, but in not such a, let's tear our cars to shreds way as Grosjean would. Yeah, the war in Ukraine, I think just wanting to bring him back and have an experienced person alongside Mick really did extend things, because up until then I was like, okay, I think he's done now, and we all knew Grosjean is not going to come back, especially in a Haas. But I'll be honest, I didn't mind it what he did in the sprint race, because he kind of acknowledged that he was basically told to do that. He thought it was stupid, and it's like, to be honest, if he doesn't mind getting a bit argy-bargy, never scoring any points again, possibly losing his super license, why not just keep using him as a battering ram? Think of it like Neville in Need for Speed Carbon. He's just there to run people off the road so that Hulkenberg can get 1 point in every race or something. But in the main race, he starts at the back and then he takes out Logan for fighting for 16th or something. It's at a place you can't really overtake at as well. That's just him being reckless.
I will say the sprint race, the one fun thing about his fight with Hamilton is that you would see the Lewis onboards and you think he's done it, and then Magnussen would just spawn like on the hidden angle of the camera. There was this one instance where it seems so obvious that Lewis has dive bombed him and it's done, it's over. I didn't even notice much space between Lewis and the wall after the turn. And then Kevin just spawns back and then swoops down the inside again. And I was there like, how is this happening? I mean, it was fun, but yeah, personally, I just think it was a bit too much. The one redeeming aspect is that it's fun to see how Magnussen and Hulkenberg hated each other, and now Magnussen is defending with all his might just for Hulkenberg to get 2 points at every single weekend.
Yeah, that's what it looks like. I'm not quite sure why the gap is so big between them. I mean, I think it suggests Kevin's probably just fallen off the cliff. He's finished. But I think I agree with what you both said, that maybe what he did in the sprint was exciting. I think what he did in the main race was totally unacceptable. I mean, he crashed into Logan Sargeant, effectively. And you expect more from a driver who has 10 years of experience now. So I think that's where the frustration comes in. You're in F1 for 10 years. You're highly defensive, and you're very much a driver that has poor consistency. You cause unnecessary accidents. And I think that's going to cost him dearly at some point here in the near future. But anyways, that's my take on Magnussen. At least he provided some entertainment.
And quickly on Hülkenberg then, what do you guys think about his improvement, which just keeps on going at his old age? Is he getting back to a level that we saw 12, 13 years ago when he was at Williams, then Force India, where he was this extremely prospective driver? Do you guys think he's getting back to that level, and a level where he could challenge for podiums with Audi in 2 years?
It's too hard to say, to be honest. Other than because it's a big manufacturer, they're going to have a massive budget. There's no real knowing how competitive they'll be because they're still using all of the Sauber infrastructure and assets. But at the moment, I think we can probably assume he's driving at basically the maximum of the car. It helps that clearly Magnussen is being used as his wingman. But if he's finishing 8th, 9th in races, more often than not fighting Lewis, I think we can assume that that's the most that Haas can do, particularly as tyre wear is no longer a problem. It at least means they're standing out in terms of, because I like teams that do something different, whether that be through tyre strategy or race tactics. At least Haas are trying something different with the way they're kind of deploying Magnussen like this. So they stand out in that regard. They're kind of, they're starting to, in my eyes at least, I think they're improving their image now that they've got Gunter.
Yeah, absolutely. What I really think, though, that's noteworthy is that Nico Hülkenberg, I mean, he didn't score points in the main race. He came 11th. He definitely is driving better than I think any time even before his comeback. In my opinion, this is probably the strongest Hülkenberg since 2013. But it's hard to tell because I actually think Magnussen probably is a bit past it too. I mean, I don't think Kevin is driving well. So it's just difficult to tell. I think he's probably getting the maximum, but and that's probably why Audi have signed him. But it is a bit difficult to tell. But certainly it looks like from the outside, Nico is really on it. So credit to him, and I agree with your sentiment there, Peter, that I share your sentiment that this is a much more professional-looking Haas without Gunther, who I think was more focused on himself than the team. And I've said that for many years. I mean, I always thought Gunther Steiner was an unprofessional team boss, despite the fact he entertained. And there's a reason why Jaguar and Red Bull didn't want to keep him around. So that's my take on that.
I feel like his post-team principal career is telling of what you said, Kyron, because he has loved becoming a pundit for like 4 different channels at the same time. It was said that he would be an analyst for some German TV channel, but now he's appeared on Sky and Canal Plus as well. So he's loving it, and I think it's showing that what he really likes is. It's not a coincidence that he took the limelight. He had the limelight in Drive to Survive. But yeah, from Haas to the other impressive team of the weekend, McLaren, I think it's time for us to look at this this elephant in the room. Lando no wins becomes Lando 1 win. What do we think about all of this? There's so much going on social media about this. Obviously, everyone in the paddock seems happy. Frédéric Vasseur was celebrating with the McLaren garage as well, which was a bit surprising. I'm sure Kyron will have a few things to say about that firstly. So go on.
I didn't know that. I'm not sure why Vasseur would be celebrating with the arch rivals like that.
They
I just don't like
an orange cap. He put it as a snapback, and then he sprayed the champagne on Lando as well at the end.
That's odd. I mean, can you imagine Ron Dennis walking over to the Ferrari garage and spraying Michael Schumacher with champagne after he's beaten Mika Hakkinen. I think there would have been a civil war inside of McLaren had that happened. That is outrageous. I'm going to have to take a look at that later. I really don't like stuff like that. You know, you're competitors. You know, like show some restraint, like show some competitive nature. I mean, you should not be happy that McLaren beat Ferrari. I mean, I just find that to be immature, and maybe Vasseur doesn't have enough pressure on him or something. But, you know, speaking of McLaren this weekend, they had pace. Okay, this is the bottom line. This car was super quick all weekend, and crucially, it was quick on both compounds. You put it on the soft tire, it was at least as quick as the Ferrari, if not quicker. And on the hard tires, in my opinion, it looked like the quickest car in Formula One on the hard tire compound this weekend. It could switch those tires on, and Lando's pace was already amazing before the safety car. He was able to extend his stint while setting fastest laps at a time others had to pit and their lap times were dropping off. So I actually think McLaren have a car that is, I am very tempted to call it at the very least the second quickest car in Formula One. And on the hard tires this weekend, this car looked like the quickest car in Formula One. And, you know, before I stop here, contrasting fortunes for both drivers. One of them benefited from the safety car, but the other one, who was just as quick, really, Piastri drove a fantastic race. For the most part, he got a little unlucky with the safety car timing and then contact with Sainz. So it's such things that turn the result of the race. But overall, you know, McLaren showed that they're a very good team at the moment. They're very competitive. They have to build on this. Not sure what you guys think about that, but I would say that the car looked rapid this weekend.
Yeah, I think Miami, it's maybe not the best litmus test for a circuit. I think some people were definitely skeptical that a lot of teams are bringing upgrades, first of all, to Miami, but then also for a sprint weekend. Doesn't give you the best time to test it all. Also, this weekend, the tyres would, in general, seem to be a bit funny with everyone. But dare I say, we might actually have a battle on our hands now, because that pace, in the first half of the race, he was kind of invisible because it was Oscar who got the really good start and got himself up to third, second place. Lando was just kind of hanging around fifth or sixth. And then once he had the lead, it clearly unlocks that pace without anyone in the way of him. Max must have had some kind of damage. He hit the bollard. He probably had something because he was complaining so much about understeer in the second half. And Lando was pulling away so comfortably as well. But despite that, it could be very close from now on. And also Ferrari is supposed to be bringing upgrades in Imola, so that could be close as well. So I said this after Austria 22. I was like, maybe we're going to have like a three-way fight with McLaren, Ferrari, and Red Bull, and then Max won like every race from then on. But you never know. This could be a turnaround.
Imola is going to be very important because Aston are bringing upgrades, Ferrari are bringing upgrades. McLaren are going to see if those upgrades were one-off success for Miami when everyone was struggling with tires, or if that car is actually good. So yeah, Imola is going to really tell us a lot, I feel, about the rest of the season, because if Red Bull wins by 34 seconds in Imola, then it will have been the exact same as what happened with you in Austria 22. So yeah, let's see. But McLaren was scary quick yesterday. Lando in that final stint was mighty, and the fact he was gapping Max was something, because apparently Max had some floor damage, so we had to take that into consideration. This whole cone incident was quite funny. I'm not too sure what happened there, if the cone damaged the wing and the floor somehow, or maybe when he cut that chicane, maybe that's when he got the damage to the floor. So yeah, Imola is gonna be very important for just the dynamic of the season.
That's the question I have, Nav, which is how much of this was down to damage that Verstappen suffered versus the Red Bull car just not being able to switch on the hard tire. Because if it was mostly down to the fact that the hard tire was not able to be switched on, then yeah, we've got a season on our hands because Max struggled with the understeer and McLaren clearly did a better job. But if it was, Max was ahead before that, and if it was just a case of him hitting a bollard as a one-off mistake and damaging, like you said, the front wing, the floor, whatever else, then I'm less optimistic because he won't make those mistakes too often, I would presume. And then we may see the same thing happen again. So I'm also very curious to see what the picture is at Imola. It's hard to tell just from this race.
And also, we must not forget that Lando won this because Magnussen crashed into Sargeant and a safety car was brought out. Otherwise, Max just wins easily. Oscar was, as Peter said, very impressive. And I think that if McLaren is up there, Oscar will get a win somewhere this year because this is a driver who, on his day, will take it to Lando and isn't scared of anyone. I mean, we're going to talk about it later, I guess, with when we talk about Ferrari. But Oscar was not scared of Sainz at all during this battle and was not scared to defend very hard against him. And just a last thing on McLaren, as we know, they have improved a whole lot since the start of last year. What are some examples you guys have of cars that have improved so much throughout a year, maybe throughout 2 years, but more importantly, like similarly as in 2023, because that was a very rare just improvement.
The only other example that comes to mind is Jordan 1998. That wasn't quite such an extreme improvement, but it was still a very obvious one when they threw out Gary Anderson in place of Mike Gascoigne and basically turned the car inside out, and then started getting points and then eventually a win in a very strange race, admittedly. But then that did give them that benchmark to have a very, very solid car for 1999 that was effectively third fastest for most of the year. It's hard to think of, other than 2009, I guess McLaren Ferrari, a similar level of improvement from the middle part of the season when they started winning races each other. Hard to think of any others.
Yeah, I think you hit those ones. I think there's two other ones maybe I'll throw in there quickly. 2004 for McLaren. The MP419 was a joke at the beginning, and it was still pretty bad at the end, but it was much, much better. I mean, they were fighting for wins by the end of the season when they were qualifying 14th and 15th at the beginning of that season. And then I always remember 98 and Ferrari because they were so far behind McLaren in that first race in Australia in 98. The McLarens lapped the field. And then by the end of the season, that Ferrari was really close to the McLaren. So they effectively made up like a 1.5 second gap, which is, even though they were second, they bridged that gap by a crazy amount on the Goodyear tire. So there's not too many examples. And I just want to say, I've never actually seen a team turn it around the way McLaren have last year. I've never seen that in my time watching Formula One, which is suspicious. But I'm not claiming anything. It's just odd because they were dead last in Bahrain last year. And they suddenly went to being the second quickest car by mid-season. James Key and Andreas Seidel do not look amazing right now. That's all I can say. Because their departure coincided with massive performance improvements, and credit to the McLaren Aero team that has a very unique structure. Obviously, they've done an amazing job, and like we said, they looked like the quickest car on the hard tire compound this weekend. So, frankly speaking, Nav, I've never seen anything like that.
Yeah, that's quite fair. And finally, on Lando, do we think this is gonna spur a new era of Lando Norris where he's more confident? And we cannot deny he's a fast driver. I think it would be extremely unfair, just plain wrong, to say that he's a mid-table or middle of the grid driver, or just midfield. Great. Football and Formula One are getting to my mind. A midfield driver or just a mediocre driver. He is a very fast driver, but do we think now he's going to be more confident about taking it to Max, maybe making more statements about how he's world champion material and stuff like that?
I mean, he's broken the ice by winning. I mean, he admitted, though, in the cool-down room that he didn't make a single overtake in the race. So basically, he acknowledges it happened for the safety car because of the safety car. But that being said, now, you know, the whole Lando no wins thing is gone. All I was thinking was, couldn't he have waited a race or two so that, you know, he does break the outright record for most podiums without a win? Because Hakkinen was on 16, I think, before he got his first win. He could have just done that first, because now he had the win, he had the record until getting the win for people who'd never won a race. This was an exception because he got very lucky with it. He would need to prove that he can beat him in a fair fight, which is probably unlikely in basically normal conditions. But even so, yeah, a big confidence booster. It takes that weight off of like, oh, I haven't had this win when I could have won a race 2.5 years ago that didn't quite happen. So yeah, hopefully, and with the car improving, I'm hoping that it can be a boost for them. And I don't think it wouldn't. So I knew that a McLaren would win a race this year before the season started, and maybe we can see Oscar win one too. Yeah,
I think that we need to also, you know, keep a level head on this. This is one win. It's a great achievement. It wasn't a total fluke, even though it was triggered by a safety car. It likely wouldn't have happened without that safety car. But that car has real pace. They have a very, very good engineering team right now. They have momentum. They have 2 good drivers. Things are looking up for McLaren. But, you know, this team is just one of many right now, including Ferrari and Mercedes, that are kind of snapping at Red Bull's heels. It'd be good for Formula One to have all these teams in the mix and quick. So it's positive to see, but I don't want to jump to conclusions right now. I'm still not sure how much of this was down to Max hitting a cone. So, like I said, I'm going to wait till I say, like, oh, this is a pivotal moment in Lando's career. I think Lando was long overdue a win. I don't think this is going to change anything. I think this just makes him maybe a little less nervous. And yes, we could see a slight performance increase. I don't think the floodgates are going to open. I don't think suddenly Lando Norris is going to turn into Senna or Prost or Hakkinen. So
that's going to be to the dismay of his fans, who are extremely passionate about everything he does. Yeah. It's also a good time to talk about Red Bull then, because you've mentioned a few times how we're going to have to assess what exactly was the pace of the Red Bull this weekend. What can we really take from this performance? Because Red Bull was fast for sure, got pole position by I think a 10.5 or 2 tenths. Perez I thought he did a good job in quali to just get P4, but then during the race, obviously that start, we need to talk about that start. I don't know, he nearly wiped out the entire front 5, and then during the race didn't do much as well. I mean, people have tried to praise Lewis for keeping up with Perez. I also feel like Perez just didn't have a good race at all. And I also don't think Miami really suits him at all. It's interesting because he is good on street circuits, but even last year, we can remember Max starting, was it 9th, 10th, Peter?
9th.
Yeah, starting 9th and then just eating up everyone again until overtaking Perez easily. So is that an indicator of Red Bull not being up there, or was it just Perez having a mid-race?
Yeah. My thoughts on that are that Perez struggled on every tire compound that he put on. Mediums, hards, whatever it was. And that's interesting because he even complained that there was just no grip all weekend. And he thinks that McLaren had the quickest car this weekend. So that's what's interesting to me. It's that Max was good on the mediums, but he struggled like crazy on the hards. Perez just struggled on both compounds. This is implying that maybe the Red Bull did have an issue with the tire compounds and with heating up its tires. And that's the glimmer of hope that I think many fans are thinking, this could open up opportunities for more wins from teams outside of Red Bull. Overall, I mean, what do I think about Red Bull's weekend? I think they made some decisions overnight from qualifying to the race with Perez that messed up his race, clearly. And Max all weekend was saying that he had understeer in every session. I remember when he got pole, he's like, the car felt awful, but I still got pole. You guys remember that? That's ominous. That's ominous, but it suggests that technically they didn't get the setup right this weekend. So I think McLaren just did a better job. They did a better job making sure the tires get switched on. They had a better car on the hard tire. But this is something that Red Bull can address if they get the setup right next weekend. So wasn't a good weekend for Red Bull. I think they definitely made mistakes, but it's not the end of the world. They still finished second.
I fear this is maybe the beginning of Checo's mid-season slump, because he started the year pretty strongly, and then he's just had this race where the pace just isn't there. I mean, Red Bull, they were still the fastest. Overall, I think they were still the fastest team across the weekend. It's just that it was a closer gap than particularly China, where Max was just a rocket. Yeah. Max, he seems to love to complain. It was funny that even Bahrain, first race of the season, he's like, oh God, messed that up so bad and still got pole. And he was just I think in both the sprint and actual quali, both of those, he was surprised to get pole both times because he thought the laps were really bad. But otherwise, yeah, fairly standard weekend. I mean, Max, he led the sprint, won it fairly comfortably. Checo finished third, fair enough. In the race, Max was leading pretty comfortably until the safety car. Without the safety car, if that pace drop-off had happened, theoretically it's possible that Leclerc could have caught him. I don't think Lando would have charged through to win with that passing everyone like that. Yeah, I think they just got unlucky with the safety car, but there's no reason to believe they're not still the fastest team.
Yeah, someone said that Perez was 2 centimeters away from getting demoted to VCARB. And yeah, it was a very close call at the start of the race. Also a good time to talk about that sister team, VCARB. They made the headlines, didn't they, at the start of the weekend? Ricciardo qualifying P4, finishing P4, but somehow, with the magic of the sprint weekend, Tsunoda has found a way to score more points this weekend than his teammate who qualified and finished P4 in a race. So yeah, Tsunoda finished P7 in the main race, got 6 points for it. Ricciardo finished P4 on pure pace, actually, in the sprint race and got 5 points for it. They showed a lot of promise in this weekend. Each driver deciding of a different time to show it, but they're showing some of those ambitions that in pre-season we started hearing about. We thought that VCARB could be challenging for podiums and stuff, which seemed a bit reactionary. But if the drivers can fight with the Mercs and defend on Ferraris, then things are looking good for them.
It's one thing that's funny is that we tend to have this. It's usually Lewis that does this, but whenever there's a sprint weekend, he's usually amazing in one race and then useless in the other. This time it was Ricciardo, who gets P4 outright, finishes P4 outright, doesn't seem to have any problems in the sprint race, and then 4 hours later they do qualify and he's knocked out in Q1, and it's like, what has changed in that 4 hours other than it going from being midday to 4 o'clock in the afternoon? It's like, okay, has the temperatures made that much of a difference? And then in the race, he finished outside the points. He did absolutely nothing. Tsunoda was interesting though, because towards the end, obviously everyone was distracted thinking about, partly obviously Lando was set to win the race, but also Hamilton was suddenly closing up to the front runners and Checo. And then I was thinking, but actually look at Tsunoda, he's in 7th and he himself is pulling away from George. So he's having a really good race. I mean, that's his best result ever is 4th place Abu Dhabi 2021, but 7th is one of his best drives. And if you think the first race of the year, he was getting shafted for team orders when they weren't even contesting for points. So, yeah, each driver had one good race out of the two. They're just 180 degrees out of phase with each other.
Yeah, they won't be thrilled at Brackley that a V carb was matching a Merc. That's not in the books at all. Yeah, I don't know about the sprint race format really. I mean, it just rewards somebody doing something for a shorter period of time. I mean, to me, Formula One is a sprint, but it's a sprint over a number of laps. I don't really understand why we're giving 5 points out to somebody for just racing for like 20 laps or whatever. It just doesn't seem right to me. But Ricciardo did well in that sprint race, but it's the main race that really counts, and he was absolutely nowhere again. And I think that consistency is still not there. Tsunoda drove a very good race in the main race, and again, like, he hit strategy right. He wasn't too aggressive. I think he's maturing. And the most impressive thing was, at the end when he was managing his tires, he could keep a Mercedes behind. That's a huge statement, and I think that that team in general has made some good progress. So we'll see. Their home race is coming up in Imola. I'm sure they'll have some updates there. So probably, expect more from them next weekend. It's gonna be a good one for them.
And again, this debate comes up every other week, really. Does Yuki have any proper chance at ever driving for Red Bull? Is this one of the performances where Helmut looks over and is like, P7, that's actually maybe out driving the car? That's actually the kind of performance you would want against Mercedes?
I mean, yeah, because he got P8 as well in the sprint. It was it's eventually he has to go somewhere. We've done this discussion a lot about who's going to go to Red Bull. I mean, Checo, for the time being, if you ignore this race, he's doing what he needs to do to retain that seat, which is kind of annoying, having sucked really hard last year. For Tsunoda, there's only so much time he can spend at the so-called B team before getting a promotion. But then with the rumors that Max might leave to go to Mercedes, maybe that creates an opportunity. And then Liam Lawson comes in, and maybe Ricciardo stays unless one of the other Red Bull juniors steps up in Formula 2 or 3 or whatever, and they throw them in. But you can't, even if his talent ceiling is lower than everyone else, he's at least hitting the maximum of it. You can't knock him for trying. He's very focused and committed, and he puts in 100% every time. And that alone is worth a lot, even if it means his 100% is, I don't know, half of Verstappen.
Yeah, he made a mistake at the start, but other than that, he was pretty flawless. He seemed to tone down his radio messages. I'm not going to give him full benefit of the doubt. He needs to do this over a season before I say he's transformed as a driver. But he's also, the thing with Yuki is that he has Japan behind him. He has Honda behind him. This is somebody who really has a golden ticket if he performs, because not only will he be fast if he keeps performing like this, he will also have tremendous sponsorship and political backing that will, I think, easily enable him to take a second seat at Red Bull if Red Bull decides to part with Checo. So he's got a golden ticket. He's the only Japanese driver in Formula One. He's got Honda behind him. He's young. I don't see why he wouldn't be able to get a Red Bull seat, frankly.
That's also fair. And as Peter said, Merck is trying to court Max, which is quite funny because Merck was absolutely nowhere this weekend. And yes, I mean, sure, they finished, what was it, P6 and P8, but that's not the kind of performance you want from them. They just were not there. They must be looking at McLaren and thinking, what's going on? When you are a brand as big as Mercedes, you cannot have one of your customer teams essentially outperforming you in that way, especially.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, it was pretty typical performance, to be honest, in terms of race over the past few races. It seems to be they're hovering that 6th to 9th kind of category, like 4th to 5th fastest. It was interesting in the race because, yeah, I mean, Hamilton ran along. He was one of the few drivers that started on the hards, so he was going to run long, but then he ended up having to pit before the safety car came, so he didn't benefit from that. But yeah, after the safety car, his pace was suddenly better because he was in 6th and he was close to Checo and threatening to pass him. And he finished a good 15, 20 seconds ahead of George in 8th. George himself felt fairly anonymous. I don't remember him doing much this weekend. Lewis was the one, yeah, he was, going back and forth with Magnussen, and then he got that very curious. Well, he was given technically a drive-through penalty, which we almost never see these days at the end of the sprint, which becomes a 10-second penalty that takes him out of the points, and then had a fairly solid, actual race. But yeah, they're in the position that McLaren are now comfortably beating them. Aston Martin had a howler, but in normal conditions, they're very, very similar pace to them. The whole thing of wanting to take Max away, well, my first question is why leave Red Bull? I get that things are a bit funny with Christian, but are you really willing to jeopardize your career that much? But just to get away from him or to do whatever Helmut wants you to do in a team that obviously has the best car and in a couple of years probably won't anymore with Adrian gone. But what exactly is attractive about Mercedes? Your former rivals, Toto showing himself to be this just very spineless, shrewd businessman. A lot of Hamilton fans have completely walked away from Mercedes, taken their support away from them because of this kind of behavior. It's not the most attractive outlet anymore, let's be honest.
Yeah, well said. That was a really good summary, because I think if I'm logically thinking about Mercedes, they look like they've passed their best days long ago. This is not a team on the up. I don't think Lewis Hamilton differs in opinion. That's why he's leaving. Why should Max go over to the leftovers? Better to probably wait it out in Red Bull and then see what the landscape looks like in 26. And let's remember something. Adrian Newey is, whether you like him or not, yes, he's the greatest designer of the modern era in Formula One. Him leaving Red Bull is a crushing blow. But Red Bull have a very talented engineering team. It's not like Adrian is the only one building the car. Adrian had an overseeing role. The other blokes who are working under him there are top-notch as well. So I think I agree with your sentiment that Max leaving to Mercedes seems odd, unless there's a serious issue at Red Bull that we don't know about. So I mean, today Mercedes, Lewis had a good race. He was challenging a Red Bull, but Russell couldn't really pass an V-carb, Visa Cash App Red Bull. So the point is that there really isn't a good reason, in my opinion, to go to Mercedes, and Mercedes themselves have a lot of work to do. They couldn't get their tires to work with George. He was sledding around everywhere. Lewis did a good stint after the restart on the medium. He was flying on the mediums, wasn't he? But remember what happened in the beginning of the race on the hard compound. He was nowhere. He was sledding around again. So any problems Red Bull have, Mercedes seem to have them in copious amounts. So yeah, I wouldn't leave Red Bull if I were Max. I'd just sit tight and see what the landscape looks like in a few years.
I saw quite a few clips on Twitter about Lewis in that first stint taking the chicane, I think after turn 11 or something at Miami. And there were a lot of comparisons with the Ferrari F14T because he was having to correct understeer and oversteer at the same time. And it was a bit like, yeah, that's... Firstly, the Ferrari F14T has become the symbol of understeer and oversteer for absolutely everyone. You would think it's the worst car we've had in the 21st century. And then secondly, yes, Lewis was struggling the first stint, but the last stint, he was holding up to Perez. So yes, he had a good race, but some of his fans, I feel, I mean, they are clutching at straws because there are not many things to clutch at for Lewis fans at the moment. But they overreacted with, I think, how exactly good that race was from him.
Yeah,
Peter, go ahead.
A lot of them were saying like, "Oh, don't let Lando's win detract from Hamilton's performance." It's like, what performance exactly? Like, he didn't. I don't think he made any passes on anyone. Definitely not in the sprint, and maybe not in the race. So it wasn't like a charging through going from
Piastri, but Piastri had a broken wing, so that overtake was super impressive at first. But then obviously we realized that Piastri was like 30 kph slower than anyone, and
he went from 8th to 6th. It wasn't. Yeah, there's not much to say there. I mean, I think some of it with the whole sliding around. I mean, this track is stupid, but that middle section is especially stupid because it's all very slow off camber corners. It kills the momentum. You can't overtake there, and we're seeing everyone counter steering and sliding, which kind of looks cool, but that plus the way the grip was being funny. I mean, the track in general seemed to struggle for grip because this is going back a bit, but something I just remembered, Lando, obviously he's won the race, but then was it sprint qualifying? Like, he somehow messed up every single corner on his final run in SQ3. There's that onboard. It's like every single corner he's running wide or sliding, and that was when he lost like 7/10 in the first sector or something.
Let's not forget Lando this weekend. That's a good point that you made. Lando started the weekend with all of us being like, "Oh, good old Lando bottling his potential quali performances with that SQ3 where he lost 9/10 in one corner." So that was also a turnaround because we thought this was just going to be another Norris failed opportunity. And yeah, that track was so weird in terms of heating up tires, tire temps, maintaining them quickly on the quali itself. I think it's such a disappointment when final laps are slower. Because quali should be this thing where laps get quicker and quicker, and then the intensity rises, and then the momentum is there. When no one at all improves in the final lap, I think that's an issue with the circuit, and it's something that F1 should be looking at in terms of it not happening again. You cannot have final laps where the only guy who improves just put faster tires on.
Didn't they? Because I know that Max's pole lap, it was 4/10 slower than his lap for 9th last year. Like, so he, yeah, something seriously wrong. I don't know if did they repave the track or whatever, but something just meant these cars are faster than last year's cars. They could be faster. The times were only marginally better in Q3 because actually I think Gasly, his Q1 lap, if he'd said that, if he'd made Q3, he would have qualified 6th with that. So it shows that, but also the field spread is so tiny because I think in Q1 the gap between fastest and the cutoff was about a second, and the average gap to pole across the whole grid, across the whole season so far, is less than 2 seconds. So it's very, very narrow still. And this is one of those ones. This was one of those races where you just can't make any mistakes in quali, or you'll lose a lot of positions. It was just, yeah, it was just that the characteristics were funny, and I think that played into making things a tad more unpredictable than they normally are here.
Definitely. I mean, I think we saw that like mistakes were, a bit more common this weekend, and I think at the end of the day, we saw a lot of like little mistakes under pressure from drivers as well. And it was entertaining, like Perez not having grip led to the chaos in the first turn. Sainz sliding his rear tires, hit Piastri. Max sliding around on tires led to Lando being able to jump or keep a gap in front of him after the safety car. So yeah, it was a bit of an odd situation with the track, and that's good. It gave us some excitement. But look, some teams handled it better than others, and in F1, you have to be able to handle these varying conditions. Quo wasn't changed as much as some of the fans online may think. I think there were just some weird events this weekend, one-off events that led to this result, and I'm still not entirely convinced that Red Bull are anything less than the best team. I think what's interesting is that in my eyes, McLaren look a bit quicker than Ferrari. But it's all very close. So speaking of, some of the other teams, like, what did you guys think about Ferrari's performance this race? Because going in, I think some people thought like maybe Ferrari would be the biggest challenger to Red Bull this weekend, but it didn't really pan out that way, did it? Sainz was quite unlucky as well. I'm not sure what you guys think about the Scuderia this weekend.
I don't think there was anything wrong with it necessarily. It was fairly standard performance. I mean, I was extremely underwhelmed by the livery. They were teasing at having an all blue like Nart type thing, and then it's like, oh, here's an HB logo and a little blue stripe. And it's like, great, okay. That when they got these all blue overalls, I mean, at least with Minardi, when they brought their livery, it was a good one. Even though one-off helmets and liveries, it really is getting to be overkill now. Pace-wise, yeah, Leclerc second in the sprint, third in the real race. That's fine. Didn't do much. Sainz, not his best weekend. Not brilliant with Piastri. He seemed to be having like delusions of grandeur over the radio as well, and I think he was convinced that because I think he did take damage from that contact. He seemed to be convinced he could have won the race without the safety car. Yeah.
It's so interesting though. I want to just jump in quickly because I think Sainz is frustrated because he knows that if he had gotten to that corner second in the first corner, the first lap, he may well have been able to run longer than Max and benefit from that safety car. But where I think Carlos is letting himself down is he was the one that initially made the contact with Piastri or caused it. So that's a mistake, right? Like Carlos has to accept that. But the key thing here is that nobody had Lando Norris's pace before this VSC safety car situation happened. Remember, everybody was either losing time or pitting, and the only driver that was able to extend his stint and still set fastest laps was Lando. And that's where I think Carlos is mistaken, because Lando just had an edge for whatever reason. Even though he was behind Piastri, he was flying, and he was really, really on it despite being deep into his stint. So I really don't think Carlos would have won this race. Do I think he could have beaten Leclerc with a cleaner race and a little bit more luck? Yeah, I think he could have maybe finished ahead of Leclerc, but to win, stop inventing, Carlos. Stop inventing.
Yeah, I feel like he forgot that before the pit stops, he had fallen back to 3 seconds behind Charles. And you also raise a good point there, because his start was extremely good. And if he gets into that corner second, then maybe there is a good, I don't know if it's a good chance, but there is a more solid chance of him winning. I don't know if when he made that interview, he was alluding to that, and that's the issue. Because if he is alluding to that, then I guess it's fair enough. But I feel like he thought, even with the weird start with Perez and all, he could still have won if maybe Ferrari had swapped Leclerc and Sainz for literally no reason for P3. And then he would have gone to maybe attack Oscar. It's a lot of ifs. And to quote Max after the race, for some reason, he said, so many ifs. If my mom had balls, she'd be my dad or something. Yeah, it was not going to work for Carlos. Charles had a good race, I guess. Nothing bad, nothing great. Just he has improved, that's for sure. He knows how to manage those situations better now.
I mean, Charles' start was useless. He just benefited from Checo nearly going bowling, because it was very. I think at first I thought it was Lando that had jumped into second, but it was actually Piastri. Yeah, I need to talk about starts again, because we didn't mention the sprint race. That nice 4-car coming together at the start. Because Lando, again, crappy quality in sprint, and then he gets taken out of turn 1, then wins the race. But then we had Hamilton diving down the inside of both Astons. Oh, yeah. Alonso obviously turns thinking, I need to get out of the way. And Stroll, to be fair, I don't think it's fair enough. He probably didn't know that Hamilton was doing that. I couldn't see it. He's there and then gets hit by him. And yeah, we don't normally get such a bottleneck at turn one, but both races we had someone messing up their braking and nearly, well, in one case causing a fairly big collision and nearly causing an enormous one in the main race.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a good time to just talk about Aston Martin now, because that's when it really started for them. That bad start. I mean, let's just get it out of the way. Who do we think was to blame for this Lewis versus Alonso versus Stroll incident, Kyron?
Yeah. Fortunately, I have an image now where anytime I criticize certain drivers, everyone just thinks it's because of something that happened 17 years ago. And it just isn't the case. I genuinely... And I respect Fernando Alonso as a driver. I think he is a very talented driver. I always say this. But my goodness, like, is he saying that because he saw Hamilton coming, he lost spatial awareness of where he was and he hit his teammate? I don't think so. I think it was only... What I saw on those onboards was Alonso made contact with Stroll's rear before Hamilton got to the scene. Hamilton worsened the situation. Because then when Hamilton got there, then basically that caused what was the after effect. And yes, Lewis came in way too hot. But Alonso wasn't blameless there, because either he did hit Stroll, in the onboard show, he clearly hit Stroll before Lewis is in the frame, or he just wasn't paying attention and he was so caught up with Hamilton coming, he still turned into Stroll. So I put the blame 60-40 Hamilton-Alonso. Like, I give 60% blame to Hamilton, 40% to Alonso, but it's much closer than people think. I do think it merited a penalty.
Honestly, I can see that, because it wasn't fully Hamilton like a lot of people said, that's for sure. As you said, Alonso did make contact with the Stroll in the first place. What I differ is that contact would have just been a tire-to-tire contact that wasn't going to have any impact, and Lewis coming in was not just worsening it. I feel like Lewis coming in the way he did made it a crash when it would just have been a tire contact. So for me, it's still like a 70-30 or 75-25, whatever. But it's certainly not fully Lewis's fault. The one issue I have is that Lewis got no penalty at all for that. Obviously, that annoyed Alonso, because we know he drives with a chip on his shoulder. He thinks that he's always had an issue with British bias and how he feels that the media is against him, has always felt that way since the noughties. But he does have a point here, because I don't know how Lewis got out of this without a penalty.
Yeah, I mean, the way I would take it, I'm throwing it more 80 to 90% Hamilton, maybe like 1% on Stroll, and then the rest is Alonso. Because how I take it is that, yeah, Alonso was probably looking to his right, concentrating on seeing Lewis coming up the inside, took a wider line because he could see that Lewis was going to go down there, and if I don't, we're going to crash. And then Stroll, he's further out. He probably didn't see Lewis at all, which is fair enough, and was just taking the ordinary line, and then was caught out by Alonso going so wide. And then again, that makes him hit Lando, who's even more on the outside. Yeah, I think this is something, and we kind of discussed this in an unreleased episode, is that if Max had been where Alonso was, they probably would have just crashed, him and Hamilton. But Alonso was, trying to move out of the way, because it's like, we don't crash just yet. It did mean that it meant up until then they both made they both made SQ3. Stroll beat Alonso, which caught a lot of people's attention, but that ruined that race. And then they both get knocked out in Q2 in quali, and apparently they were both carrying damage from the sprint, which would explain it. In the race, the pace was a bit better. There was enough for Alonso to get 2 points, so he salvaged 9th. Stroll did absolutely nothing, but even so, it was still not a good weekend on pace for them.
Yeah, in SQ3 when they qualified 7th and 8th, I was disappointed, but I didn't expect what would happen in quali, which was P11 and P15. Apparently, Alonso got the upgrades this week, slight upgrades, not major Imola upgrades, but he got a small upgrade package, and that took them back. And that is showing that Aston Martin, just like last year, they don't know what upgrades are. It's just modifications, and then they see if it's going to work out or not, and more often than not, it doesn't work out. Alonso got 2 points yesterday, not really through his driving, I would say, which might be harsh, but he got it mostly through the safety car, which only 2 drivers, I think, managed to pit under that VSC for the bollard removal, which was Ocon and Alonso, who both got points simply thanks to that VSC pit stop. Otherwise, Hülkenberg finishes 9th, and God knows who finishes 10th, Gasly, Ocon, someone.
The thing is that Alonso had flat spotted his hard tires. He got really lucky with that VSC timing. I mean, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And Stroll had a mare because I don't know if it's because he had the older spec tires. I misspoke there. Older spec car or whatever you want to call it. He pitted so early, and after that, it was like he just gave up. He was nowhere after that. He literally made no progress. And then he got a penalty in the end for forcing Albon off the track. I don't know if you guys remember that. Stroll actually got a penalty for that. So what on earth was that all about? I mean, he just drove an awful race. And I think Alonso also did not drive a phenomenal race. It's just that Alonso didn't fold like a house of cards and actually brought the thing home. I just don't think either Aston driver has anything to be particularly proud of this weekend. Alonso was mature enough to admit that in his post-race interview. Yeah. And he clearly, is the only hope Aston have in these kind of weekends of scoring any points. But it doesn't bode well for the team because I don't know what you guys think. Every time they bring upgrades, it just that's like a code word for we're going to have a horrible weekend. So it's just bizarre in my eyes, but I'll leave it to you guys to further opine on that.
Yeah, again, those upgrades. Imola is going to be such an important race for everyone. Aston Martin, maybe even more than others, because they have to see if upgrades really are upgrades there. If it doesn't work again, maybe last year they were surprised by how good the car was and they didn't know how to modify it. This year, the car is meant to be even easier to upgrade. If they mess it up again, Alonso might be wondering, why did I sign up for this again? And at least I will say I enjoyed that after the race. He said, that this wasn't a great weekend at all. Not from the team, but from myself, because he made mistakes. He wasn't great. Brought it home in P9. And actually, I was going to ask you, Ciaron, I know you enjoyed that battle between Alonso and Ocon. A lot of people seem to think that what we see during 5 minutes of fight on track means that the drivers hate each other, but Alonso and Ocon were very happy with their battles after the race. I think they provide us some hopes that good, fair, hard racing can still exist at the moment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, the thing with Esteban Ocon is that he's not afraid of anyone, so I like the fact that he races people brutally hard. But I have to be honest. I mean, I think that it was exciting, and they had the tweet after the race, which was nice. But Ocon's defensive moves are late. Okay, they're late in my opinion, and he leaves his move to the left or right until the very last minute. Sometimes when the other driver's already committed, and I have to put my driver preferences to one side here because I don't think the way Esteban goes racing is actually always legal. He just gets away with it. But like that move, he stayed ahead of Alonso at one point. He literally moved to the left right at the last minute. I mean, that could be a massive accident with a less skilled driver than Alonso there. he's an entertaining driver. I know people don't like Ocon in general. He's not exactly one of the most popular drivers. What I like about him is his attitude of I don't care who's behind me. He doesn't go around fawning over other drivers like Guan Yu Zhou and some of these others do that just incessantly talk about how much they love Alonso. Esteban really goes for it, but I still think his driving is a little bit on the edge. And but overall, that was a great battle. That was the best battle maybe in the race. Terrific stuff overall from both, and that's what we want to see.
Mentally, I think mentally, I think Ocon is stuck in 2015, where he's seen Verstappen Q jump and get to F1 before him, and now he's in DTM or whatever, and he's watching Max, move in the braking zone and cause all these huge accidents and everything. Is like, oh well, if I do that, maybe I can get into F1. So he's like, I'll just copy Max and do something like that. I think across the board this weekend, driving standards were just pretty bad because people were either not overtaking or they were overtaking by pushing each other off the track onto, again, a suspiciously large amount of runoff for what calls itself a street circuit, although I'm not entirely sure what you would describe it as because it's built into a car park and has the vibe of a street circuit. But yeah, it was just scrappy. Like a lot of people were not doing their best. And the star of the show ended up being somebody who won by not overtaking anybody.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think the tires had a big role in that. Nobody seemed fully confident, and we saw mistakes happen as a result. I mean, people were sliding around. And I always say, sometimes the best racing doesn't happen when drivers are struggling. It happens when they're really confident and they can be precise in the placement of their car. It just felt like nobody could be precise this weekend because the tires didn't give enough grip over one lap for these guys. So I agree with that. Naf, what do you think about that?
I just don't like when the entertainment is a bit forced through bad tires. Well, basically the entertainment comes through errors, so bad tires, bad surfacing, bad driving. There are many ways to just have an entertaining race with fairer just aspects of it. And I'm saying it as an Alonso fan who, I've seen Alonso thrive on surfaces where everything is slippery, no one knows how to drive. I'm saying it objectively because, it's the same thing as, Magnussen is what F1 always needed, or maybe Magnussen is what Formula One wants for the next few years. Yeah, you want a maverick who could crash into anyone to provide the entertainment. I'm not too sure that's what I want for sure. And I used to watch F1 when Grosjean was around, and that was a bit the same. So yeah, just because Magnussen was dangerous for one race and that provided entertainment doesn't mean that in the next race he will be dangerous and put the driver off the track. Because in Jeddah, again, the other example of Magnussen over defending for Hülkenberg, he was 5 centimeters away from shoving Albon into a wall at 250 kph, and he would have gone into maybe a barrel roll or something. But because that didn't happen, people were calling for Magnussen to be driver of the day. So yeah, if you wanted Magnussen driver of the day in Jeddah, he could have been driver of the day for the sprint as well. I just don't really like those fabricated entertainment aspects of Formula One at the moment. Well, one thing that wasn't fabricated was Alpine's first point, that's for sure. They have finally broken the ice, gotten a point. I said they would be the first team to get a point from those back markers because they just are more competent and they have better drivers than Sauber and Williams at the moment. And yeah, Gasly had a good race. Ocon had, as Ciaron said, a good race as well, even though he tends to be overly aggressive. Do we think this is going to stay for a while? Has Alpine made the junction to the midfield now, or again, Imola is going to be the marker?
I think so. I mean, their improvement across the seat so far has been very stark, and it's been by far the biggest of any team. It's just now we've only really noticed it this weekend because they got a point. But if you think that they were on the back row in Bahrain by quite some margin as well, this is a significant improvement because they both made Q2, I think. And yeah, Gasly on raw pace could have been fast enough for Q3. So that's improving, even though they still have...
Ocon was... You mean Ocon or Gasly? Which one was it? One of them, anyway.
Gasly's Q1 lap was fast enough for like 6th in Q3.
Yes.
Yeah. So the pace was there. Even though the team seems to be just as rudderless and leaderless as usual, they're kind of coping with Ocon and Gasly probably doing half of the engineering roles as well as driving at this rate. But yeah, so I don't know, there'll be the odd point here and there. They're not quite on Haas level, but they're probably matching. No, they're better than Williams. They're faster than Williams and Sauber at this point.
Yeah. This is an insane sentence, by the way. Alpine are not quite on Haas level. If you said that as an improvement sentence before the season started, no one would have believed you for sure.
Yeah, it's been an improvement for sure. It's exciting to see those two going wheel to wheel at the beginning of a race. And I think we should just quickly note Gasly actually had a good race. He was just very unlucky with the timing of his virtual safety car. Otherwise, I think he could have probably scored points too, because he was ahead of Ocon at one point. I think Alpine are rudderless, as you said, Peter. I think they don't have a clear direction, but they have two competent drivers. So I actually think that if they can build a car as quick as Haas, for example, the two of those two guys, I mean, they should clearly be the team that can. Like, to me, they have the strongest lineup outside of the top 4 teams. So there's no reason for them not to be able to beat all those other teams if they can build a car at least equal to them. They've got 2 competent drivers. That's more than you can say for most of the teams on the grid right now. It's usually one driver that's competent and the other one not so much, especially in the midfield.
Speaking of Gasly, this is massively off topic, but I noticed with Sky that before the next race in Imola, they're doing this segment on the drivers that were born after Senna died and what he kind of means to them. They've got him driving what appears to be the 83 Tolman, or maybe it's the 84 Tolman in the 83 livery. And I'm like, okay, so that's not even a car that Senna raced. Yes. Is Gasly known for being a big Senna fan? That's a really random pick to suddenly do this tribute to Senna of the drivers, the younger drivers that look up to him. Because you think someone like Lando would have been a more obvious choice for that.
Yeah, Gasly's a bit more like Jabouille than he is Senna, frankly. I don't really know why they would even make that link.
I think it's just because Alpine now derives from Tillman.
Yes, that's of course that would be so they're allowed to use it.
That's very disappointing from Peter Brook right there.
But I'm convinced that was the 83 Tolman, because the 84 Tolman had the broadly white livery, and the 83 one, that was Derek Warwick's one, had the blue and the red with that really weird, like squared off grilled front wing. I was just like, what? It's a weird combination. All of this.
Yeah, it's the 83 one. Yeah.
Pullman became Benetton.
Yeah, in 86. Yeah, 86.
86 they became Benetton, did they? Okay.
Yeah, but 83 because Senna tested a Williams in 83. That was his first time in a Formula One car, wasn't it? I don't think he ever drove the 83 Tolman.
So it's the 84 Tolman, but for some reason it's called the TG 183. But yeah, it is Senna's 1984 Tolman, and he drove it at Silverstone last week for TV thing.
Yeah. Senna definitely drove the 84 Tolman. I was a little confused why the 83 Tolman would be used.
It's like in 20 years' time.
Gasly said this car is a car from Team Enstone, so we have brought it back to the factory to show it to the entire factory. It was incredible to show to see so much positivity around Enstone. This is a fantastic day, blah blah blah. So I think it was more of to show the Enstone factory where they come from and what led to Alpine nowadays. That's why they did.
It's just random because it'd be like if in 20 years' time they're going to get drivers that are like massive Kimi fans that never met him, and they've got one of their Audi drivers, and it's like, here's the 2000 Sauber driven by Pedro Diniz. Like, it's just it's like, why? That's an odd one. That
is an odd one. That's actually the first car Kimi tested though, the 2000 Sauber. He tested it at Mugello.
Oh yeah, that's the one where he beat Diniz in the test, and they were like, okay,
He beat
this
Diniz.
make it the 99 Sauber that was what's his face? Herbert and not Herbert. Alesi. Yeah, that one. I don't know.
That's a good one. Imagine they had an event where it's Ricciardo driving a 1997 Minardi or something. Oh, they said Luca Badoer, who nearly got P4 in 1999. Here is his race, his car. And then it's Ricciardo trying to say how much this car means to him, even though he didn't know the team existed.
Yeah.
It's like giving Logan Sargeant the 98 McLaren. Sorry.
Speaking of Logan Sargeant,
would do that. Yeah, they probably would do that for an event. Well, actually, yes, Sargeant is a good mention for the final bunch of teams to cover, which are Sauber and Williams, who were. I mean, if we can get more than 3 minutes of chatting about this, it's impressive. There was nothing that came out of this weekend for Sauber and Williams.
Well, Peter, what did you want to say about? I agree with you there, Nav. So let's like transition into Logan Sargeant. I mean, Peter, did you have a thought on that? I think you were talking about that earlier.
Yeah, I mean, well, Sauber will take about 10 seconds, but with Williams, I'm gonna say this because I'll probably never get to say it on any other weekend. I think Logan was better than Albon this weekend because he finished 10th in the sprint with, a couple of penalties in there, but he beat Albon messed his last lap up and qualified last, and Logan was 17th or 18th, and then beat him outright in the sprint. He got 10th, which is, not far off a point.
This was the first time that Sargeant out-qualified Albon.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And then in the actual race, he teased us because he qualified 12th at first, and then he drops to 17th, but he was only 300ths away from getting to Q2. So really not far off. Albon did, obviously. And in the race, Albon was in front of him. They pitted only about a lap apart. They were about a second or two apart. So he was matching him on pace. And then that crash, that's on Magnussen for me, because that's really, he tried to pass him at a really stupid place and made himself go over the curbs. And it's his home race. And it's like, yeah, and until then, he was doing nothing, which is what he needs to do. He just needs to have weekends where he doesn't do anything, and he was so close to having that, and it just got kind of killed. But he's not driving like someone who knows that this is his last race and there's a certain Italian that's going to have his seat from Imola.
Febro asked Grosjean on the French French commentary who was at fault for Sargeant versus Magnussen, and Grosjean didn't really want to take aside, but he said this was certainly not a competition of intelligence, which was quite good because, Magnussen shouldn't be there, but Sargeant also should know that if Magnussen is behind, he shouldn't be closing the door at that corner. It wasn't Sargeant's fault for sure, but if you know you're racing Magnussen, you always just leave that much of a bit more width for him, I'd say.
It's a bit rich coming from Grosjean, frankly.
Yeah.
Glad he wasn't involved in that. Would have been a 6-car pileup. It would have been another Drive to Survive feature. But I mean, honestly, it's Logan Sargeant was closer to Albon, but then at the same time, like, he was behind in the race again. Like, he just never has a weekend where he can dominate Albon. Like, just one weekend where you're just ahead of Albon, please. I mean, that's what he needs to do, frankly. Albon is not a world beater, and Albon himself claims he had floor damage, which resulted in his very pathetic lockup at the end, costing him several places. If that was in a top team, he would have been crucified for it. So he's lucky he's in Williams making a mistake like that. So horrible weekend for for Williams, and I don't really know like what the heck is going on at that team. They have two drivers that just, in my opinion, are very unimpressive. Albon is more impressive than Sargeant, but that was a rough weekend for them. That's for sure.
I need to milk Albon being bad because I need people to realize it's like, okay, yes, Logan has bad weekends and crashes, but so does Albon. Everyone keeps saying, oh, Albon's amazing and he's going to do all this stuff. It's like, yeah, but he keeps crashing. It's just that every time he crashes, they give Logan's car to him. And this year, it's not like he still doesn't have any points yet this year. And that tactic of, oh, you can have the only car in Australia, and then guess what? He doesn't get a point. It's like this gap is like Logan matching him is a victory in itself. When you think how last year there were some races he was like 40 seconds behind, it was like, dare I say, De La Rosa, Carter K, and HRT kind of gaps at the back. But this was a good one. Similar pace, didn't mess up qualifying, wasn't on the back row like that for once. Beat cars that are usually faster. Was in the race. He didn't make any moves. He was trying to make some, and then he just gets taken out. And then Albon has his own enormous lockup and finishes. I don't think he quite finished last, but kind of nets last at the end.
That's a great point, Peter, because actually, if Sargeant hadn't been taken out by Magnussen, there's a good chance he would have beaten Albon today with that stupid lockup Albon made at the end. Which I don't understand how floor damage.
Where from exactly? Like the middle sector over the curbs? Where did he get the floor damage?
I mean, is it with like, I don't know, was that with maybe with Stroll? I'm not really sure. It's just bizarre that like floor damage causes you to lock up into a corner and lose a bunch of places under pressure. Why don't you just say you made a mistake, mate? And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a good chance I think Logan, had he just had a clean race, maybe he would have capitalized on that and passed Albon on track, because that's a bad mistake. Like, again, you're not a rookie anymore. If Fernando Alonso is fighting for the lead of a race and he's got Raikkonen, Hamilton, Michael Schumacher, and Jenson Button behind him, and he locks up and all four of them pass him, he's going to hear about that until his deathbed.
From you.
But for some reason, nobody pays attention to Williams, and Albon makes a horrific mistake. Like, that is a really, really bad mistake. And after the race, it's like, oh, he's adorable. I don't get it. Like, I don't understand, like, the Albon love. I've never understood it. And I'm not trying to put the guy down. He's talented. He's in F1. But I think there is some truth to saying Logan was on his level and may well have beaten him had Magnussen not taken him out. And
do you think this has to do with how people generally view midfield teams or backmarkers? Like the standards of analyzing them goes lower when they shouldn't really, but you forgive drivers more for mistakes at the back when, at the end, those drivers should be judged in the same light.
Yeah, I think if you're not fighting at the front, you get less scrutiny. And then if you're not a big name, you also get less scrutiny, because people just have an image that they're happy with of you, and they're not really looking at you in the same level of scrutiny. I think if Fernando Alonso had made that mistake, it would just, because it's Fernando, it would be more attention. But yeah, I don't think someone like Alex Albon in a Williams is going to ever draw that level of attention. So he gets away with it. I don't really understand how, but he gets away because he makes mistakes. This is not a flawless driver, guys. This is an error-prone driver under pressure, and I stand by that. That.
As you said, like if Alonso made a big mistake at Belgium 2004's quali, someone would probably post a video about it on YouTube.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, like, those guys, like, they're so good that you got to take your wins when one of them makes a mistake, and it was more exciting, and at the end of the day, those guys are icons of the sport. They have millions of fans tuning in just to see them. If one of them makes a mistake, it's chaos after that. It's just going to be a battle. Albon doesn't really have that, and he's such a neutral character. Everyone just likes to say, like, oh, good old Alex. He's a super friendly guy, and I've noticed that he doesn't really split opinion too much, but we can't confuse the fact that maybe he has a tame and nice personality with holding drivers accountable. I don't think he's all that. I don't think he's a world champion in waiting. I don't even know if he's ever going to win a race.
Yeah.
Anyways, Peter, what do you think? I went on a bit of a rant there. What do you think about
last year he was good. The gap between him and Logan was pretty obvious, and he was having a lot of stellar races, like Canada, for example, and when they were just doing their whole Williams uses straight line speed, it's super effective sort of thing. But this year he hasn't really been that impressive. I mean, I've made a channel and a career essentially out of scrutinizing backmarker teams and drivers and kind of going into like, this is when this person was better, and loving to emphasize the occasional weekend when Carter Kane was better than De La Rosa, or even Yamamoto was better than Sato or something, because it gets forgotten when you're just backmarker teams and it's not fighting for anything. But you just have to try and take the wins where you can get them. In this case, win meaning Logan vaguely matching Albon on pace, because I think had he beaten him in the race, it would have been good, even though it would have been it would have been with Albon making an error. It would have been better if it was like he out-qualified him, was faster in the race and pulled away. But, he had a race where without the crash, he would have just done nothing for the first time in forever, which he just desperately needs at the moment. He needs to drive like Sauber and just be invisible.
And quickly on that, if Antonelli is in for Imola, which is very unlikely, but if that happens, what do you think? Because I feel like you're not just talking about Verstappen going from Formula 3 to Formula 3 European, whatever, to Formula 1. You're talking about a driver who goes from FRECA to Formula 2 to Formula 1 within 6 months. That's psychotic.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a driver go from Formula Renault to Formula 1. It's been done in the past with less experience than Kimi Antonelli has. I mean, if you think about Kimi Räikkönen, he's still the most inexperienced rookie there ever was. He went from Formula Renault to Formula 1 in the space of a year. That's not even allowed anymore. You can't even do that. So I think Kimi Antonelli is a lot of hype right now, and that hype is well-deserved. I think he'll be fine. The real question is Williams going to be a good spot for him to start? Because, you want to nurture a talent like that. You don't want him to get discouraged. And I don't know if Williams is look at what happened with Mick Schumacher. Now, Kimi Antonelli is much better than Mick Schumacher was. But Mick had a horrible team at Haas that did not give him support, did not give him a benchmark. He was getting into fights with Gunther. I think being at a team like Williams with strong ties to Mercedes, James Vowles, I think it's probably a good spot for Kimi Antonelli, and I think I don't think he'll be intimidated by Albon at all. I expect Kimi within half a season to be matching, if not beating, Albon. So I'd do it in a second if I were Williams, with all due respect to Logan. I don't hate Logan at all. He hasn't been good enough yet. So I get Kimi in there, Kimi Antonelli in there right away, and then they'll have a stronger lineup. What do you guys think?
Okay, so it's been well over a month since the last Formula 2 race, but if we just look at Kimi's results, after 3 rounds, he's 9th in the standings. We got 14th, 10th, 6th, 6th, retired, and 4th.
Oh.
Yeah, it's really not brilliant. It's not like Kimi Räikkönen, where he had 2 seasons in single seaters and he won about 60-70% of the races he entered.
Correct.
Something like that. It's like he hasn't won. Okay, he was amazing in FRECA, but it's FRECA. You get a lot of drivers in that who don't even have their own Wikipedia article. But so far he really has not adjusted well to Formula 2, and it's kind of funny that Behrman's had his race and he really proved himself. But he's 19th in Formula 2 at the moment and has 2 points. Like there's only 3. The only drivers he's ahead of are Joshua Dirksen, Correa, and Taylor Barnard. Like this, and he's the one that's probably getting a seat with Haas next year.
I mean, must be said, we're not implying that he's not very good. It's just quite funny that in Formula 2 he's 19th.
I know, and it's like I kind of feel like if he'd out of the blocks was performing like Zane Maloney has been performing, who at this rate probably won't even get a seat at Sauber or Audi or whenever they become whatever they're going to be next year. I think people are getting so a bit ahead of it. It's like again, it's like he's the chosen one, and it's this prophecy when people keep bullshitting that, oh, he's like 10 seconds faster in the wet in some test where nobody was there and there's no official timings or something.
Antonelli and Pele have the same stats where, just like Pele scored goals in his garden, which led to him scoring 1,200 goals in Brazil that no one saw. Antonelli supposedly lapped 8 seconds faster than everyone at hidden circuits where there was only the guy who was there with a stopwatch.
His mom was on the timer.
Yeah, exactly. His mom had a timer, and they were Mugello alone with the W something. I just think they're being way too hasty with Antonelli, and give him his time. He's 17. Again, he's 17. He's gonna be good. Just wait.
I have to admit that I didn't realize his results were that poor. So thanks for pointing that out, guys. I jumped the gun there a little bit. I was assuming he was leading F2 with all the hype. I just assumed. I don't know why I didn't bother to look at the standings. So that's shocking. You know what that says? It's just it's too easy for a driver to come into F1 and be on the pace. But even Behrman, I mean, honestly, like, people were so impressed with him when he made his debut, but he got handily beaten by Charles. I mean, as you would expect. But he did a good job in terms of applying himself. I don't know. It's not good that he's 19th. That's really bad. That's not a good look for Formula One if he gets a C. And then this Kimi Antonelli is not ready for F1, in my opinion, if he's not beating the F2 guys handily. I mean, that's surprising.
Well, in defense of Behrman, he is 19th because there's been 3 rounds and he missed one of them.
And that round he missed because he got a pole position and he was probably going to win that race, but he missed it because he was put into a Formula One.
And this,
Imola is going to show a lot for Formula One and Formula Two. I can't wait for the Imola round.
It just the calendar, again, I'm going off topic. The F2's calendar is so stupid. You get these enormous gaps because they're desperate to have every single Middle Eastern race represented. It's like, oh, let's wait 3 months between races, and you forget. I can't remember. Like, Australia was 6 weeks ago now. I can't remember any of that. It's a bit like I can barely remember who's even racing in Formula 2 and Formula 3 now because these gaps are so massive. But it is a funny one because Behrman, I can only commend him for Jeddah because he did exceptionally well considering he went into that weekend prepared to do Formula 2. He missed a lot of the practice. He only did FP3, still qualified 11th and finished 6th or whatever. But at the same time, it does show that the cars have never been easier to drive. And this is helped by the fact that the Formula 2 cars now have ground effects. They're basically F1 cars with smaller engines. Which does bode well for Zane Maloney because he's driving exceptionally well if he wants to go to Sauber next year, as the adjustment shouldn't be too much of a problem. There's lots of paradoxes because they're easy to adjust to, and it seems like anyone can do it, but then no one gets to do it because they're kind of gatekeeping all of their teams and they're scared to let newcomers try. The other thing with Kimi, that this whole under 18s thing, it is hugely ironic. They're trying to get rid of this rule. That rule was brought in to stop more Max Verstappens when Max Verstappen is on course to become the most successful driver in the sport's history. It's like, was it really necessary to say no under 18s in the end?
That's a good point, actually. And Zane Maloney is the one name who has really shown in Formula 2 this year. This segment started as a Williams and Sauber talk, and it is testament to Sauber that we didn't even say a word on them. Do we have a word to say on them, or should we just skip and be like, if there's nothing to say, there's just nothing to say?
I want to say one thing. We'll see what happens with F2. I don't like how people call this kid Kimi. There's only one Kimi. There is only one Kimi. And you don't get to take that name unless you earn it. I don't care what your parents called you growing up. Your name is Andrea Antonelli.
But Kimi isn't his legal name.
Kimi is an institution. That is a myth of a name.
Is it a thing in Italy that you have your middle name? Or is his first name Andrea Kimi, or does he just
Kimi is his legal name. It's not a surname. It's not a nickname. It is his.
It's not like his middle name.
No, it is his legal middle name.
His real name.
Yeah, his name is actually Kimi Antonelli. So no, Kyron, that's not a nickname. It's actually his name.
Okay,
Fine.
so I'm trying to think because like Juan Manuel Correa, is his first name Juan Manuel? It's not double-barreled, but like, or is Manuel his middle name? Because
No,
why isn't he just
it's
Juan
both
Correa?
names. It's both names, Juan Manuel, but it's not double barrel. It's like Juan Pablo Montoya.
Okay, so is that the same with him? So his first name is Andrea Kimi, and then his middle name is whatever his middle name is. Then we don't know.
His middle name is Kimi. Yeah. His middle name
No,
is
I
Kimi.
mean his first name
No.
is Andrea Kimi. That's his. I think his middle name is Andrea because in a lot of countries your unused name is the first name. So because he goes by Kimi Antonelli. So even though it's Andrea Kimi, Andrea is not taken into account.
Why does he go by that if his name is Andrea? I don't understand. It's Andrea and then Kimi.
Like his first name is Kimi, like that's his name. Because like in Indian names as well, in a lot of Indian names, you put two names and then maybe the first name is something that maybe the mother wanted and then the father wanted and then they yeah.
In '84, everyone kept calling Senna de Silva. Like in his first year in F1, that was quite common.
Really?
You hear that a lot in commentary and stuff. It's just Andrea. I suppose maybe he thinks a lot of British people are going to call him Andrea and think he's a girl or something. It's just it's that's a funny one, but
yeah. Antonelli shares his middle name with the first name of Kimi Räikkönen because his father was a massive supporter of the Finn.
So he is named after him. Okay.
Yes, but now his middle name is named after Kimi Räikkönen.
But his normal name would be what? Andrea Antonelli.
Exactly.
But he goes by they chose. You can choose whichever
name. You don't get to go by that. I'm sorry, you don't get to go by that. That's like saying, "Oh yeah, my friends call me Michael Jordan." Like, no.
No. I mean, the middle name
is Kimi. You don't get to just call yourself.
The thing is, middle name is a bit of a Western concept. It's more of a unused name in a lot of countries. Like a lot of countries, the first name is not can be the middle name if you.
Well, yeah, because Kimi, his full name is Kimi Macias Räikkönen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Double-barreled, and then Fernando Alonso Diaz. That's another one.
Yeah, but that's different. Diaz is because in Hispanic countries you put your mother's name at the end as well.
Yeah.
What's Sainz's mum's one? Because
he
must have
Carlos Sainz Vasquez de Castro.
Oh, he has such a long name.
And then
he has a massively long name.
Leclerc's
my
got like
party trick is to know the full name, but I'm not going to say.
And then Leclerc has got like 200 middle names or something, hasn't he?
Yeah, Perceval, Henri, Marc-Henri, something.
So. Hervé, blah blah blah. Yeah. All of that going on. Then Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton. Yeah. A lot of mouthfuls.
Kyron, by the way, the Antonelli thing, it's very disputed if he was named after Raikkonen or not.
No, his father was a supporter. That's the official story.
Some people say his father was a supporter, but a lot of people also say they just like the name. I want to think that his father is a supporter because that's a better story. But
well, yeah, it fits the bill of being actually he's a Mercedes Junior, isn't he? Because he drives for Prema.
Exactly, yeah, that's what it makes.
I thought he was going to be Ferrari Junior, and he's this kid who's done like 2 years in single seaters, and they move him up again. Although his personality seems to be nothing like Kimi's.
Andrea is reserved for close family and friends, whereas Kimi is what he was always called at school, and since the age of 5 at school, so it wasn't. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, Sauber. So Bottas starts.
Not cool. Okay. Anyway, Sauber. Go ahead, Peter.
Sauber. Okay. Bottas starts 16th, finishes 16th. Zhou starts 19th, finishes 14th. Puts softs on, doesn't pass anyone, but still beats Netflix and doesn't crash and beats the people that didn't do anything, but the people that did mess up. Yeah. That's it. I mean, also their pit stops weren't slow. They were under 4 seconds, which for them is not bad.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Bottas took that gamble, didn't he, at the start with soft tires, and he ended up doing a 3-stop and finishing 16th. Amazing. And Joe did a better job. But these two were even like going wheel to wheel at one point, if you remember. And I think Joe had to evade and cut a corner, and they didn't make contact at least, but they were fighting amongst themselves for some of the race, and Joe came out on top. So that's a big moment for Guan Yu Zhou. Or Zhou Guan Yu. He beat Bottas in a straight fight today, which for him I'm sure will be positive. He'll want to continue to do that, because usually Valtteri gets the upper hand in those straight duels. So that's good. What's not good is that they were absolutely nowhere in pace, and they just couldn't overtake. They didn't have the speed, and they can only pin their hopes on upgrades in Imola to help the situation. But they're just they're in no man's land. They are in absolute no man's land. That is just not a strong team at the moment. And what an awful livery they have. Just absolutely. They wonder why they don't get any airtime on TV. Nobody wants to look at that atrocity of a car that they have. Anyways.
Yeah, I have nothing to add. I mean, they didn't do anything this weekend.
I mean, the
At
livery.
least their pit stops weren't as bad.
Yeah.
Well, they got less airtime because their pit stops have improved, because at least they were getting airtime and attention because of that. But now they have absolutely nothing going for them.
Yeah, pit stop again. When Leclerc did his stop and it was 1.9 seconds, I was convinced none of those wheels were attached, because I was like, they did that. I thought it was like a 1.5. I was like, that was insanely fast. But yeah, with the livery, I mean, okay, so when they launched it, I was like, okay, well, it stands out bright green. You'll see it because it's not just black carbon fiber. But now it just looks cheap and boring. And it's like they're trying to be Monster Energy without being Monster Energy or something.
Yeah. I thought it looked cheap and boring from the launch, because it's just such a un-F1 like livery. Formula One liveries are not like IndyCar or NASCAR liveries. They're elegant. They're supposed to tell a story. They have history. That looks like the outside of an energy drink. Like, it really does. It's just absolutely minimal thought put into that. And it doesn't even fit the team. This is a Swiss team with heritage and, supposedly in a beautiful Hinwil factory. I mean, the Alfa Romeo livery was gorgeous at one point. So I don't really understand what the heck is going on with Kick Sauber. I mean, the only thing they're kicking is themselves, frankly.
Shouldn't their title sponsor be isn't Tissot a Swiss watchmaker?
Yes.
It should be that should be their main sponsor, and they have to do some deals with some chocolatiers or something like that, something actually Swiss. Or or their stupid pre-race gimmick is they have to learn how to blow those Alpine horns or something, or whatever.
I agree.
So you would want it to be Tissot Lindt Sauber F1 team.
Yeah, Tissot Lindt Sauber. That's a great combination. Chocolate watches.
It's a classy combo. I like it.
Yeah, and a nice red and white kind of checkered livery to represent the flag, and just have
the Alps on the side pods.
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Anyway,
I mean, why couldn't they do that? They've got the dirtiest livery. It just looks like an unhealthy drink that. It looks like an IndyCar livery, honestly. It does not look like something like an F1 team would put on their car.
I could see it on a NASCAR car.
Yeah.
I think. And also, it looks like one of the stock liveries that you get in the games. Like one of the ones that just comes for free and you don't have to pay to download it or something.
Careful! Apparently, we're going under fire for comparing every bad thing to IndyCar and NASCAR. So, Peter, you're gonna have American fans onto you again because you made it an IndyCar NASCAR.
I like I've got nothing against IndyCar. I don't understand some of their rules, but it does what it does, and it can be very entertaining. I mean, at least compared to apart from this weekend, you don't go into it thinking, oh, we all know so and so is going to win every race. It's a bit more of a gamble. I don't understand ovals. I think they're a death trap. But it's good. It does its job. It's just there's a few things that maybe my European mind needs some refining.
Yeah, I think Peter, you just touched on something I've never been comfortable with, which is the safety standards in IndyCar and NASCAR are significantly lower than in Formula One, and you're doing an oval at those speeds and you hit the wall at 90 degrees, you're finished. Like, you're going to have some kind of life sustaining injury that will be, with you for life. and we saw Bourdais smash his hips. I've never been comfortable with the ovals because they don't do enough safety testing on them. And if you hit the oval, if you hit the outside of an oval at 90 degrees, you're basically in a fatal situation. And I don't like that. That's not what racing should be about. And I also find the driving standards to be pathetic in some of these series. I mean, I watched, and I'll get Nav, I'm going to hand over to you in a second, but I remember watching, and this is why Formula One is the pinnacle for me. I mean, there's just higher standards. And I remember watching Jensen and Kimi in NASCAR at Coda a couple of years back, and I was disgusted by the way people were racing. I mean, they in American racing, in NASCAR particularly, there's a culture of retribution whereby it's like, you go get that guy. He did this to you, so you do this back to him. And it results in some of the messiest and dirtiest racing I have ever seen. And I just don't have time for that, yeah? I mean, let's go racing and let's go clean but fair. They don't race like that, and it just bothers me. It just bothers me to no end. So if you don't want to say it, I'll say it. Formula One is still, despite its massive flaws, the pinnacle of motorsport. It's the place everyone wants to be. We should be unapologetic about it, and it is a European motorsport. That's it. That's it. And that's my view. I'm not putting that on anyone else on the podcast. That's my view, and I stand by that. You should be proud of that. Anyways, Nav, what do you think?
Well, those safety features coupled with the new IndyCars are why Alonso never went for that, because he was thinking seriously about going to IndyCar in 2019, I think, after his retirement. He wanted to do endurance for a bit, did that, and he wanted to do IndyCar to fully focus on winning Indy 500. And then when the new car spec dropped, he was like, this is too dangerous. And, this is a guy who has had some of the scariest crashes around in F1. I mean, there's the Australia 2016 crash, the Brazil 2003, where if that happened nowadays, people would be scared for his life. So yeah, if you've got drivers like Alonso being what seems to be a bit scared of IndyCar, then that says a lot on their safety features.
Every year at the 500, there's a near fatal accident. In the past decade or so in IndyCar, they've lost Dan Weldon and Justin Wilson. Robert Wickens ended up paralyzed as well. That was in IndyCar, wasn't it? Or maybe NASCAR. Yeah. With the fight, it's because it's concrete walls, and this is something we outlawed effectively 30 years ago because of Imola. I guess if you were going to take Indy and you replace the concrete walls with Tech Pro barriers, okay, the crashes would be safer, but I guess the problem with that is the Tech Pro barriers, you would bounce back onto the track easier. And if you hit them at that speed, they're just going to get knocked and come loose, and you're going to get red flags if such a thing even exists in IndyCar. They seem to do just full course yellows all the time and stuff. It's just like, I mean, last year, was it Carl Kirkwood? He was the one, he flipped his car. One of the wheels went into the car park and smashed someone's car on.
Scott Dixon nearly died. Was it in 2019 or 2017? The one where he hit a wall on the side, and then he went across the track and then hit the wall on the inside, and I was sure that he died. Was it 17 or 19? And then he miraculously walked away from that. But that should maybe have, I feel like in most circumstances that's a death.
2 years ago, Callum Ilott broke his hand in the 500 in a crash as well. There was also, I think that was a crash where it showed obviously the aero screen is very good because a wheel came off and it hit someone's aero screen directly and just harmlessly bounced off. And without that, they would have died. It would have been just like Henry Surtees. It's that needs addressing. Ovals, the safety, it's just the racecraft side is just odd to me because they do essentially 3 weeks of testing and practice. And I was like, how long does it take to set up a car to do 4 left-hand turns? Like, let's be honest. Why is that so difficult? And I don't understand the logic of, it's the slipstreaming and the trying to build a lead. And it's like, how can you build a lead when everyone is going full throttle the entire lap? You can't, if you're leading, you're automatically the slowest driver because of slipstream. it's all very odd, and it just feels like a game of chance at the end of the day, which I guess we saw because they had their own mini Abu Dhabi 21 at the end of the Indy 500 last year.
I want to make a short out of what you just said and see if it blows up and ends up on engineering circles about how this F1 YouTuber said that making 4 left-hand turns takes 3 weeks. I just want to see what that...
It's just such a huge amount of practice for that. And I know that setup, it's probably easier to refine the setup because I imagine it's a very asymmetrical one in terms of toe angle and stuff because you're only doing left-hand turns. But even so, it's like, why is that? Why does it take so long to work this out? It's a really odd one.
It's a narrower range of setup options too. I mean, the thing is that look, F1 is the pinnacle, and it's not just the pinnacle for drivers. It's the pinnacle for engineers. It's the pinnacle for car design and sponsors. And I really just think that the caliber of engineers in IndyCar is not at the level of Formula One. So the things that we think take 1 second in F1 take other series days, I guess. I mean, I can't explain why it takes them so long, but I've always wondered, why do you need that much time to set up a car for, what is a shape? So, I mean, yeah.
Also, it's a spec series, which I really resent, having. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, different engines, but the chassis are all the same. I mean, the people that have done it, so Armstrong and Eilert, who have, nominal Formula One experience, have said that it's different in that because the tyres last, you have to push all the time. And so the cars are really physical, which is fair enough. And maybe that's something that F1 could learn from. The racecraft, and maybe because it's a spec series, they're so close. The racing is just more exciting often.
Yeah.
The point system is very strange. They give out colossal amounts of. I think everyone up to 30th place gets points. It's quite odd, but it's fine. It's fun. It's similar to Super Formula, and it's effectively a national series that's at the top of its game, but it's not like an international series like Formula One is. Yeah.
It's nowhere near Formula One, in my opinion. Honestly, I don't understand this obsession with people talking about IndyCar and NASCAR as if F1 has something to learn from these series. F1 is not as good as it could be, but my goodness, we don't need to take anything from IndyCar or NASCAR. Because, frankly speaking, a spec series is correlated with no innovation. And while F1 has more predictable results from time to time, the quality of racing is better, the quality of drivers is better, and I think F1 needs to just implement more variables than looking at what IndyCar has. It's offensive to me. I mean, F1 is the pinnacle, and people need to understand that. And sometimes I feel I don't want to make this too political, but sometimes I feel like people who watch IndyCar and NASCAR are just they feel a little insecure about it. It's they know they're watching an inferior series and they don't want to admit it. I don't know. I've had this experience with them where they're no, NASCAR drivers are just as good as F1 drivers. They're not. They're not as good. Because think about the way the world works, the incentive structure, right? If you're a road course driver, where would you want to race? You'd want to race where you have the best cars, the highest paid salaries, you have the most longevity because of the safety standards in the sport. Why would you race anywhere else? Because you couldn't make it there. And that's the hard truth. If you gave every NASCAR and IndyCar driver a contract for an F1 team, they would take it tomorrow. But if you gave every F1 driver a contract to an IndyCar and NASCAR team, it would be a second choice over staying in Formula One. And I put everything I own on that statement. Guys, F1 is the pinnacle, and I don't really know why we need to talk about IndyCar or NASCAR beyond just our own interest in it. I don't think it has anything to offer F1, but that's my arrogant view. So.
Yeah, it's the same with Formula E. Find me one driver who, as a junior or when doing F3 and F2, is I really just want to go into Formula E and win that. It's no, you go there either because you were mid in F1 and got fired, or you weren't good enough to get into F1 in the first place. And nobody will admit this, but the only reason that anyone watches Formula E is to see mindless destruction on these.
Or to see or you became a fan of a Formula One driver and then you watch Formula E. Like no
Yeah.
one watches Formula E for the thing. It's like, for example, in my case, I like Verline, so I'm going to watch him. People became fans of Stoffel Van Dorn, so they're going to follow Van Dorn. Yeah, I mean,
only now you can't watch it because they put it behind a paywall when it used to be on Channel 4, so it used to just be easy to watch.
well, actually, no, because for some reason, if you're outside the UK, sometimes the Formula E channels streams it on YouTube. So, for example, from where I am, I can just watch it on YouTube. It makes no sense. Don't ask. I have no idea how it works. But yes, F1 remains the pinnacle of motorsport, and this is why we need to look at the top 3 of this weekend for the Miami Grand Prix, which was hosted for the pinnacle of motorsport. Who were your top 3 drivers of the week, Peter? Of the week.
Of the weekend, let me think. Okay, well, I guess we have to say, well, I'm going to call him Lando No Overtakes. Tsunoda and no, not Logan. Piastri. Though, yeah, that'll be.
Yeah, that's a really good list. Hard to argue with that. I'm going to go with Lando, Tsunoda, and Ocon as my top 3. They just maximize their cars.
Yeah, same. I think Lando, Tsunoda, and Ocon are fair. Piastri is up there because I don't think it was his fault really. None of things. So he was up there in terms of pace. Maybe if he managed the Sainz situation better, he would have been top 3. Who was the worst driver of the race then for you guys? Ciaron, I know that you had some ideas on that already.
Yeah, so to me, it was like Kevin Magnussen. He unnecessarily caused an incident, and that's just a bad look. Albon was pretty subpar as well, but it's got to be Kevin. Caused a safety car, unnecessary accident. A driver of his experience shouldn't be making mistakes like that. He was thrashed by Hulkenberg yet again. Sorry, Kev. It's just not good enough yet. So
Kevin at least provided some entertainment, so I'll say Albon was the worst of the.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, actually same, and Ciaron convinced me on Albon and how Sargeant really shouldn't be beating him. So yeah, Albon as well here, I'd say.
Well, yeah, I think we've covered just about everything, including a lot of asides into shitting on other sports as well. Yeah. Thanks as ever to Nav and Ciaron. You've been listening to the DRS Train podcast. You can find us on YouTube and Spotify, and we're on Instagram and X at the DRS Train podcast. Make sure to tune in for our next episode. Stay safe, and we'll see you all next time.